I work as a dispatcher in a mid-sized city in the Midwest. I mostly work the evening shift. It was around 2 a.m. that night, and I was on my way home when I made a huge mistake. I stopped to fill up on gas. Looking back now, I think it was foolish. The gas station was half dark. The lights weren't working properly, and there were no other customers there. I usually have a good sense of where to go, but the strange thing was that this place had never seemed suspicious to me before. While I was filling up, I noticed a middle-aged woman sitting on the sidewalk across the parking lot. It was a cold night, and a light rain had just begun. She was completely drenched, and her clothes were not appropriate for the weather. She caught me looking at her and then called out, "En bues phone at the foot." My next mistake was to talk to her. Feeling a little sympathy for her, I went over to her, wanting to see if I could help her. She greeted me with a smile, and without wasting any time began telling her story. She said she wanted to go back to the city, but no one was helping her. The taxi fare was $60, and she only had $40, Then she asked me if I could pay the rest. I don't usually give money to street beggars, but at that moment, the woman seemed genuine, and the weather was terrible. My job is all about helping people. Perhaps that's why I agreed. I told her I had no cash, but if she came inside with me, I could withdraw money from an ATM. We both went inside, but unfortunately, the ATM wasn't working. I apologized and said there was nothing I could do. She accompanied me outside, making light conversation, as if everything was normal. I opened my car door and was about to get in. Then, without a word, the woman got into my car. I was stunned. I couldn't say anything. I just stared at her. She calmly fastened her seatbelt, as if everything was perfectly fine. But the real horror. As soon as she got inside, her entire demeanor changed completely. She no longer looked as calm and innocent as before. Instead, a strange restlessness, a passion was clearly visible in her eyes. She suddenly asked me to drop her off at her aunt's house. She would get the money there. Alarm bells started ringing loudly in my mind. My first thought was to throw her out of the car immediately, but a strange voice in the one of my heart told me that doing so could be dangerous. She was already unpredictable, probably drunk, and I didn't even know if she had any weapons. I asked her. She simply said, "I'll show you the way." I flatly refused. I said, "If I want to take her somewhere, I need to know the correct address first." I didn't really intend to take her anywhere. She kept insisting that she wasn't a bad person and wasn't going to rob me, but I remained firm. As I continued to ask her questions, she grew restless and angry. We were still parked in the same petrol station parking lot. I considered getting out of the car and going inside to ask her, but she knew the attendant and was socializing with him, and I couldn't risk leaving her alone in my car. Suddenly, she exploded. She angrily asked, "Why am I asking so many questions? Don't I trust her when she considered me a friend?" I told her that I work for the police department and asking questions is part of my job. Well, hearing this, she went completely wild. She started yelling, calling me an informant and saying I was trying to frame her. Now, I was even more scared than before. I just wanted her to get out of my car, but I couldn't. I mustered the courage to force her out. So I made a risky decision. I told her I wasn't a police officer. I just worked there. Then I suggested we go to Walmart. Maybe the ATM was working there. My plan was to somehow get her out of the car and escape her in the crowd. Surprisingly, she immediately liked the idea. She calmed down. And I was forced to drive with the strange woman. All the way, she kept talking. Her words were incoherent. Not a single word making any sense. Sometimes she'd say some people were following her. Sometimes she'd come to my office tomorrow, and we'd arrest them. Well, I just kept agreeing to keep her calm. But with each passing moment, her lies and stories kept changing. Sometimes she wanted to go to the city. Sometimes she said she needed to go somewhere far away. Sometimes she'd say the taxi fare was $60, sometimes something else. Every word seemed like a new lie. Finally, we arrived at the Walmart parking lot. I breathed a sigh of relief. When she got out of the car, she followed me into the store. I told her I had to go to the bathroom. I had originally intended to go inside and call the police, but she followed me into the bathroom, and that's where the story took another terrifying turn. She suddenly came very close to me, grabbed my hand, and whispered something extremely filthy and terrifying into my ear. What she said froze me to my core. I somehow freed myself and immediately entered a stall and locked the door. Now there was only a thin wall between us. I told her that some of my friends were in the police. They could help her better and the bay. At the mention of the police, she started screaming again. I kept repeating that they would help her. After a while, she angrily said she was leaving and quickly walked out. But the story wasn't over yet. She was waiting for me outside. Less than a minute later, she returned to the restroom and began pounding on my stall door. Then she said something that terrified me. Come in the car with me. My beer is left in your car, she said. No. A shiver ran through my body. Because when she got into my car, she had nothing with her. Just her wet clothes. I flatly refused. Then she went out again, and this time she didn't. I hid inside for about 5 minutes. Then I slowly emerged and went straight to the store manager, who immediately called the police. When the police arrived, I told them everything. Deep inside, I was ashamed of my stupidity. If this matter had gone to my own department, I probably wouldn't be able to face anyone. The officer listened to me and advised me to be careful in the future. He explained that sometimes people who ask for help suddenly turn violent. And recently, a woman with the same appearance had a kind person who had stopped to help her. That night, I learned a crucial lesson. The fear of strangers isn't just a thing in stories. It's just as dangerous in reality. And perhaps I was lucky to have escaped unscathed that night. Friends, the next time you decide to help a stranger in the dark, think again. Dice goda. I have some strange and terrifying stories from my hometown. This is the first of them. At the time, I was a 20-year-old college student and worked at an old, rustic-looking petrol pump. It wasn't a separate building, but a small booth attached to a supermarket. This booth was located across a large parking lot, and behind it was a dense forest. The ghost's door opened onto the forest, and this proved to be the most frightening aspect. The ghost's front window was bulletproof, but it was limited to the front, meaning you couldn't see what was happening to the left or right. I'd been working there for a few months when suddenly, one night, a terrible storm hit. The rain was so heavy that you couldn't see clearly, even 10 feet ahead, and the entire area was flooded. But, driven by greed for money, the supermarket refused to close its booth. I arrived at work that stormy night for my usual 5 to 11 p.m. shift. Nearly 3 hours had passed, and the storm was already a disaster. Then suddenly, the power went out. It was pitch black, and the rain poured down incessantly. I decided to sit inside the booth and wait until a manager came to tell me to leave or the power came back on. The phones were out, so I couldn't contact anyone. And anyway, no one was going to come to get petrol in this weather. I started doing my odd jobs, cleaning the counter, counting cigarettes, sorting the money. But there's one important. You should know. The booth door was always supposed to be locked. But a few days ago, a new employee broke the key inside the lock. The manager had to break it and a new one hadn't been installed yet. We were simply told to behave as if the door was locked. There was a deadbolt. But, to be honest, I often forgot to put it in. Or rather, I didn't think it was necessary. Whenever I opened the door, I would just pretend to insert the key and make a squeaking sound to make the person in front of me think the door was locked. That night, I was sitting in that same unlocked booth. It was dark outside, and it was pouring rain. Then, I heard a sound from outside. It was like someone walking through water making a splash. My breath stopped. I went to the door and clearly heard someone moving around the booth. Then those footsteps came and stopped right in front of the door. An instant thought came to my mind. But before I could do anything, I heard a creaking sound. It was as if someone was trying to open the door from outside. And then, a few seconds of terrifying silence. I just stood there, waiting for the door to open and some strange figure to come in. But, suddenly, the sound of footsteps began to retreat back into the forest. I immediately locked the deadbolt and spent the rest of my shift in fear. Occasionally, I would hear the same footsteps again, but he never tried to open the door again. Finally, my manager brought his truck and took me away. I was new, so I didn't tell anyone about it, fearing they would think I was crazy. A few months later, a new guy told me he'd heard similar me footsteps on a stormy night. I simply told him not to open the door if he heard anything outside. I gave this advice not because I was afraid, but because I couldn't figure out what it was. A few more months passed. Now I was one of the oldest people at the booth, and new people would call me for help. One night, I was on leave around 9:30 p.m. It was from my coworker. Let's just say her name was Ria. As soon as I picked up the phone, she was crying loudly. She said a trainee had disappeared. I got a little irritated and told her to call the police if it was a kidnapping. But she kept insisting. The police wouldn't believe her. Even the manager wouldn't understand. Finally, I agreed to go there myself. I arrived at the booth. It was quiet. There were no customers, and Ria was standing inside, staring at the door with frightened eyes. Seeing me, She quickly opened the door and invited me in. After a while, she calmed down a bit, and what she told me blew me away. She was draining a new boy, Matt, who was behaving strangely, as if he were a machine or in a trance. He kept staring at her, occasionally stopping in conversation and ignoring her. Rhea was starting to panic and was about to call the manager when Matt started making a strange noise. It was a heavy humming sound, a bit like a cat's purr. When Rhea picked up the phone, he grabbed her hand and stared at her. Rhea screamed, and he let go, opened the door, and suddenly ran into the woods. A few minutes later, he returned, begging to be let in, but Rhea refused, and he disappeared into the woods again. I thought maybe he was drunk or just too scared, but the situation still seemed dangerous, so I decided to call the police. Rhea was refusing to go out, saying she felt like she was outside. I got a little irritated and decided to go out myself. I took a small flashlight and went out, and as I shone the light towards the woods, the hairs on the back of my neck stood up because I heard the same humming sound again. Rhea was right. The voice sounded less human and more like something else. It was as if someone was breathing in the dark, mimicking something strange. I looked inside and saw Rhea huddled in a chair, staring to my left. I didn't dare look in that direction and immediately ran towards the booth. But Rhea had the keys, and she was so scared she couldn't move. I started banging on the door, shouting, "Open the door, quickly!" Then the humming suddenly stopped, and I felt movement behind me to my left. I turned, and my blood. It was standing at the edge of the woods, staring at me in the dark. My panic was at its peak. Then Rhea opened the door. I immediately entered and locked the deadbolt. Seconds later, Matt was standing outside the door, begging to be let in. He apologized over and over again, repeating the same things as if they were a broken recording. He paced around the booth for about 5 minutes until the police arrived. As soon as he saw them, he ran back into the woods. I told the police and the manager everything, but no one mentioned that strange humming sound. As far as I know, Matt never returned. He was fired, and Rhea quit shortly thereafter. We never spoke about it after that. Even today, I don't know what happened that night. Maybe Matt was a drug addict or something else beyond human comprehension. But the truth is, that voice, that shadow, and that darkness of that night still linger in my mind. This incident happened in the early 2000s. At that time, my husband worked for a large insurance company, and his work required him to travel frequently from city to city. In his absence, my young daughter and I were home alone most of the time. A few years earlier, we had bought a house in a secluded area a little outside the city. The road to our house wasn't easy, especially during bad weather. The last 5 miles from the city to our house were very narrow, covered in loose stones and mud. One night, the weather was extremely bad. My daughter and I were stuck on the same road. The rain was pouring so hard that we couldn't see clearly. I was trying my best to keep our old Subaru on the road, mine. But within moments, I misjudged a turn and the car slid straight into a roadside ditch. My heart started pounding. But thankfully, my husband had already registered us for the roadside assistance program. I called him immediately. He said he was very busy due to the bad weather, but he would come to help us as soon as possible. Now, we had no idea how long we would be stuck there, so I made my daughter sit as comfortably as possible, and we waited. After a while, I stopped, and then I realized how far we were from home. About 2 miles in. For a moment, I considered walking. But then I remembered that no one was there to bring the car back, so I decided to stay put. Help was on the way, and all we had to do was wait. About 10 minutes after the accident, I saw headlights approaching in the distance. A flicker of hope rose in my heart, but it wasn't a tow truck. It was an old, rusted pickup truck, driven by a middle-aged man. As soon as he saw our car, he slowed down and peered inside to look at me. For a moment, I thought he might stop to help, but he drove on without saying anything. I didn't pay much attention at that time. But about 5 minutes later, the same truck appeared again, coming from the other direction and moving much more slowly. It passed me, staring at me again. Our eyes met for a moment, but this time, it didn't stop. It didn't stop. No, a strange feeling of unease began to creep up on me, but I consoled myself. Maybe he had lost his way or was simply heading back toward the highway. I told myself he wasn't obligated to help us. Maybe he thought we were just standing there, or that he wasn't from here and was just trying to get home. But the real fear began when the truck returned for the third time. It was now completely dark. And as a woman, I felt more vulnerable like that. He approached us again slowly in the same manner. This time, he passed us, stopped, immediately turned around, and stood facing us. He simply sat there about 10 yards away, staring at us for a few minutes. My breath stopped. A strange fear gripped my heart. Then he opened his car door and slowly, niggardly began to get out. The moment his foot touched the ground, the headlights of another vehicle appeared in the distance. The man stopped and stared at the approaching vehicle for a few seconds, as if waiting for a decision. As the vehicle approached, it became clear that it was a tow truck. The man immediately retreated and quickly got back into his car. I turned the car around and sped away. My heart was pounding so loudly, I could hear it. I didn't calm down until I clearly read the company name on the tow truck. The tow truck driver wasted no time in pulling his car out in front of us and began to pull my car out. Within minutes, we were out of the ditch and back on the road. I thanked him, but the fear that had gripped me deeply still persisted. All the way home, I kept an eye on every turn, every dark corner, hoping to see that rusty truck again. Even when I pulled into my driveway, I was still worried it might be waiting there for us. But luckily, it wasn't. It wasn't. It did. I got my daughter home safely and somehow managed to pull myself together that night. A few days later, when my husband returned from his trip, I told him about that stormy night. But I didn't mention the part about the strange truck. I didn't want him to be unnecessarily worried, because he had no other option. He had to go out for work. After that incident, he bought me a nearly new 4-wheel drive Jeep so I wouldn't have to face such a situation again. After that vehicle, I never got stranded anywhere, no matter how muddy the road. Gradually, the memory of that stranger faded, but for about 2 weeks, whenever I passed that road, my eyes would involuntarily search for that truck. Time passed, and the incident almost faded from my mind. But recently, when I was at a store, I saw a similar Sona Soti Wageresha. It wasn't there. But the sight of it brought back every terrifying memory of that night.